May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. So those of you who have been in church the last couple of weeks may be a little confused as to why we've suddenly gone back in time. Just last week, Jesus was all grown up, standing in the temple, reading from Isaiah and introducing his ministry. And this week, he's a baby again, being presented in the temple for the first time. Well, the reason for this is that traditionally churches celebrated the presentation of Jesus at the temple and the something called Candlemas during this week. And we've decided we're going to celebrate Candlemas or Candlemas, depending on who you talk to. Drawing on Simeon's words that Jesus is a light to all and a glory to all peoples, Simeon's words became the inspiration for Candlemas, and churches began to bring all of their candles that were going to be used throughout the year, and of course they were the only source of light and warmth in the church, to be blessed during this time. And then those candles became a symbol of Christ's light to the world in the church. In the northern hemisphere, where winters were long and dreary, and February is a time where we're all getting a little bit tired of the cold and of the early setting of the sun, Candlemas became associated with the various celebrations of the light beginning to return, of day getting longer. And people would actually bring their candles from home to be blessed. And then those candles would be an image of Christ's light that can never be overcome in their very own homes. So today we are going to, all of you should have gotten a candle. If you didn't, we'll make sure you get one. We're going to bless candles and invite you to take them home. But more than that, we are going to be reminded that we are also aglow with Christ's light, and that Christ's light can never be overcome. Even on the coldest, longest winter days, the light always returns. And not only is that light for us, but we are called to be bearers of Christ's light to the world. So today I'm going to tell you the story of how I became convinced that the church had perhaps the most vital role in being a light to the world. I was in graduate school studying for my PhD in rhetoric, composition, and the teaching of English, and I was well into my PhD studies. I was studying a particular group called the Owl and the Panther in Tucson, and as I was studying this group, I learned about the sanctuary movement that started in Tucson in the 1980s. Well, if you haven't heard of this movement, it's a little bit like a modern-day Underground Railroad. What happened is that two social workers began to see immigrants coming through who were very different from what they'd seen before. And these immigrants had very strange wounds on their body. Soon it became clear, this was in the 1980s, soon it became clear to these social workers that these were immigrants who were experiencing torture. They were being hunted and damaged and put to death in their own countries. And they were starting to come across the borders to seek asylum. Well, many of them were immediately deported. And you know what happens when somebody is deported to a country with a despotic government. So many of them were experiencing death and torture when they went back. 3 pastors learned about what was happening: a Presbyterian pastor, a Catholic priest, and a Quaker pastor. And they came together and declared that their churches were going to be sanctuary sites. They would be safe spaces for these immigrants. And as these stories started to get out about what was happening to these immigrants, to these torture survivors, churches across the nation started to declare themselves as sanctuary sites. And an entire Underground Railroad began to happen, bringing people out of Latin America and into these churches. And these torture survivors began to tell their stories. In Tucson in particular, a group called the Center for the Prevention and Resolution of Violence was created when the Hopi Nation began to learn about what was happening and decided they wanted to partner with these churches. And they created an entire organization of lawyers and doctors and nurses and social workers and therapists and teachers and volunteers who came together to say, we want to help heal the bodies and spirits of these torture survivors and support their families. Well, this group, the Owl and Panther, was specifically meant to serve children of torture survivors. Two women, two of my personal heroes, Amy Shubitz and Marianne Neal, who were a part of the early sanctuary movement, became particularly concerned with the way that trauma was beginning to exhibit in these kids' lives. And so they specifically wanted to support these children. And they created the Owl and Panther to serve these children in particular. Well, as a part of my research, by the time I got started, these were adult children. So I got to know their stories. I got to hear the specific stories of how they had seen their parents tortured, how they had fled threats to their lives, how they had gone on these incredibly dangerous journeys to get to the US. And I was stunned at the kind of trauma they had survived and at the extraordinary bravery and resilience these children exhibited as they came to the US. And I was so moved by the way that so many people of faith and goodwill had come together to say, we are going to support you. We are going to heal your bodies. We are going to be a part of healing your spirits and your minds, and we will accompany you. This was the first time it became very clear to me that the church can do literally life and death work in the world, can literally save lives, can literally heal tortured bodies and traumatized spirits. And it became clear to me that my call was not to study movements like this, not to just study the original Underground Railroad, not to just study the abolitionist movement, not to just study the civil rights movement, not to just study the sanctuary movement, but I wanted to be a part of a church that was interested in bringing Christ's light in such extraordinary ways to the world. And so I finished up my work with Owl and Panther and decided to go to seminary. What has stuck with me about Owl and Panther, one of many things, is their name. Owl and Panther comes from a Cherokee creation story. The gods invited and challenged all of the animals to stay up for 7 nights. And the only ones who could stay awake all 7 nights were the owl and the panther. And so the gods gave them the ability to see and navigate in the dark. That is what Owl and Panther does. It helps, it accompanies people as they have to navigate their ways through their own personal darkness, as they have to navigate their ways and see in the dark and come out on the other side. And that, to me, is such a perfect picture of what we are called to do as bearers of the light of Christ. We are to know that Christ's love and light are with us as we navigate through our own long winter nights, and that light will never, ever be overcome. But we are also called to take that love and light and become so aglow with it that we can help others to navigate their way through their cold winter nights. And this is a reminder, too, Candlemas, is a reminder that we don't do that alone. Christ's love and light accompany us as we do this. No matter how long the winter seems, no matter how short the days seem, Christ's light will never be dimmed. Christ's light will never be overcome. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, says that even if you have all of the most extraordinary spiritual gifts, you're just an annoying gong or cymbal if you don't have love. You are nothing if you don't have love. No matter how impressive your knowledge, your skills, whatever it is that you think you have is, none of it matters if you don't have love. All of that will pass away. What will remain? Faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. When it feels like hate is winning, when it feels like the winter will never end, when it feels like compassion and kindness are under attack, we need to be reminded that Christ's light is with us and is in us, will help us to walk through and see in the dark, and will allow us to help others navigate in the dark as well. So